Everyone, and welcome to Lodestar's Lending Leaders. I'm Elena Gardner, and this week I get to flip the script a little bit, and I actually get to interview our CEO, Jim Paolino, as he comes back from his paternity leave. Welcome back to the podcast, Jim.
Thanks. Hey, thanks for not only all the work you've done while I've been out, but especially with the podcast to keeping it going. I know it's a bit of a labor of love, so really appreciate it. I've been enjoying the episodes.
Yeah.
And I'm excited because I don't think we really prepped on what these questions are. So who knows what's going to happen?
Exactly. We just kind of we're flying today. Yeah. So first of all, coming back into it from your paternity leave, kind of what are you most excited about coming back, after taking a few weeks away?
Seeing everyone. Probably first and foremost.
Yeah,
we're probably about 50 feet apart recording this right now. Just being in that office atmosphere, being around people, being on those meetings. The team's been fantastic in really taking on a lot of stuff and really continuing to grow the business and do all of the things. So I just want to be a part of that. I'm excited about that. I think compared to when I was before my daughter was born, so we're talking about October at this point, my job has completely changed, mainly because you ripped a lot of it away from me in the best way possible, but also just because it was something that allowed me to let go and something that I would want anyone in a management role and an executive role. You want to be able to let go of things so your job changes, especially as the organization you're a part of grows, because when you're 2 people, when you're 12 people, when you're 20 people or more, it's completely different what you're going to do. And I think this is gotten me to a point that's very necessary for the business going forward. And I don't think I would have done it if there wasn't like a big life event like this. And if I didn't have someone like yourself constantly saying, protect your time, don't do this type of stuff.
Yeah. I think that's the most common thing I say to you, and I occasionally get to say it to Dave as well.
Yeah.
Of protecting your time is so important as a leader, and having it available for the right people.
Yeah, but hey, letting go's tough, and I think usually it takes an outside force to make you do that. I really got to do this vacation, or there's a family emergency, something came up unexpected, and it takes priority over work, right? And I wish for everyone would be a little more proactive about that. So we'll certainly try my best to do that going forward. If nothing else, if you start to get annoyed by doing same types of things you don't think you should be anymore, that's probably when it's time to pass things off too.
Yeah, I think that's an important piece. And we talk a lot about expertise, I think, and handing things off to experts. How are we looking at that as a company going forward this year? Of course, we're the experts for some people, but we have our own things that we have to hand off as well.
Oh, that's a really good question. I think when I think about expertise and getting on help with things, the way I like to think of it is rent or buy, right? To bring it back to real estate of, do I need to buy this experience, like hire someone, or can I rent it? Can I get a contractor? Can I get someone to do this part-time? Can I pay someone hourly? So, if there's a leaky faucet, you don't need to be the one to fix it. Right. And I think, in these market conditions right now in the mortgage industry, there's a lot of possibility to rent stuff, especially in the world that we exist in general. There's websites like Fiverr. You can think of anything, right? We now have an expert, your husband, who edits these. So shout out to John, as he's maybe listening to this right now. But that's a perfect example. Find someone who has a very specific skill set. It's valuable to you because it saves you time. It takes them a lot less time to edit something or to do something than you, and leverage that, right? So I always think of it that way of, do I need someone in-house to do this, or can I rent this? Can I go out and bring in someone on a project basis, on a part-time basis to do that? And it's also always nice too, because if you find someone who you're using part-time, but the role grows, it's a great way to kind of walk before you run and start building a relationship, which to the extent possible is something we always like to do.
Yeah. I think a large portion of our workforce has either started off part-time or as contractors. I know I did, and I know a few
Yep.
other members of my team have as well. And it works out really
Yep.
well because it gives both parties a sense to kind of know what you're getting yourself into, right? And there's no
Right.
there's no you don't feel trapped the same way that you do in some other positions.
Yeah.
But as you mentioned, kind of the overall market conditions, I think the big news this week, right, is the increase in rates, and all of that. Where do you see that going? I mean, it's definitely something we've seen before, but what's your take on it?
Yep. I mean, certainly it's been expected for a while, and now you're starting to see it. And I think seeing 5% interest rates for how long they've been for a while is scary. I get it,
Yeah.
right? It's definitely nerve wracking. I think there's a lot of folks who now are in reaction mode instead of being proactive. Of so many companies say, "Oh, now's the time to market. Now's the time to do sales," right? And yes, but also these are things you should have been doing a long time ago, right? The shift to a purchase market should have never stopped. You should have never, because refis are always very temporary based off interest rates. They're going to come back again. But I think it's, if you're scrambling now, in some ways it may be too late, unfortunately. But at the same time, I think it's important to put this in a historical context, because we're still looking at, I think, a top 10 origination year historically, as what's been forecasted this year. So it's tough coming off of the years that we've had, but we're on our end, we're still growing. And I think it's a good time in a lot of ways. There's a lot of benefits to a down market because, one, not too many people want to get into the mortgage industry right now, both as a vendor, both as a mortgage lender. It's not super sexy at the moment, right? Which means you have less competition. It's easier when banks are getting out of the market. It's a lot easier to dominate a specific area, a specific product, specialize. So I think that's really important. Also, the same talent that people were fighting over a year ago and offering crazy signing bonuses, it's probably going to be easier to hire because there's more companies that are having to do layoffs because of how they plan, because of how the industry is. So it's a really good time for talent. It's a really good time to find your niche and continue to grow. And then when things turn on the other end, you'll be well positioned. I think there's a quote. It's Almost Famous. It's the movie Jimmy Fallon's character. He said, I don't know when it's going to rain. I just buy the biggest umbrella," or something like that.
I mean, I think that's a pretty good quote. And I think it's a really interesting pitch of saying, actually, this is the time to work on your business, right? And I think, recently we attended the Ellie Mae conference, and that's something that was really, or the Encompass conference, I should say. Apologize to our friends at ICE Technology. So they really were driving home the fact that automation is something that we really need to be focusing on and putting effort into our businesses and working on our businesses. And I think that is something that is, now all of a sudden lenders have time, right? And I think that's something that as a vendor, we've been hearing a lot for the last year and a half, 2 years is, I don't have time for this. I don't have time to look at my tech stack. I don't have time to implement something new. And I think we're going to start to see a shift there of people saying, oh, I can work on my business again.
Right. And there's things that you should be doing for your business that you don't until it's slow or until you're more concerned about costs. Like we have clients who maybe a little smaller than the types of clients we have now, may not be taking advantage of the product. They look to move off because they're finally realizing, like, they're finally auditing all of their monthly expenses, right? Something that you should be doing more consistently, but we don't do, right? At the end of the day, focusing on new business, on growing the business probably is more important than a few $100s a month expenses you can slowly clean up. So it varies, but that's a perfect example of you don't really start to look at those types of things until it gets that way. And I've found, being around the industry for so long, people will overreact, right? When things are going well, they overinvest. And then when things aren't going well, they underinvest or do a lot of cuts or, start to do things that don't really set them up. So to your point, automation almost is an extension of our what we were saying about rent buy. It should be rent buy or automate, right? Because if you can just automate something and you don't have to deal with any person to do it, especially if it's a low fixed monthly cost, as a lot of softwares are, or a variable, per usage, per loan type cost, it's going to help you with that ebb and flow. And it's going to be kind of a better use of your time, something we talk about a ton. We had a prospective client a while ago who wanted to do everything himself, right? He's like, oh, I had these templates, I set this up, I manage it. And you realize at the end of the day, that's them trying to protect their job, which makes it a very challenging sale. Because ultimately, the question that you need to ask them, the question you need to kind of ask their manager is this the best use of your time? Yeah. And I think to our point at the beginning about passing things off, you always have to ask yourself that, right? Like there's nothing to me better than an employee who's going to work themselves out of a job, because I'm not going to let them go after that. I'm going to go give them something else to work themselves out of, right? That's how you move a business forward, but not everyone has that type of mindset.
Yeah, I think my favorite takeaway or piece of line from a panel at the experience conference was definitely automate to elevate, and to kind of have that conversation of, if someone is all of a sudden having free time in their day because they've automated a portion of their job, where else can they be training? What else can they learn? How else can they grow? Because if they have automated that, that's great. Figure out something else for them to do. There's always more work.
Yeah. And it's tricky to picture what that looks like, right? Like what does 10 minutes of file mean to someone's day? Yeah. At the end of the day, right? Like how does that add up? Even if, we give these big numbers about hundreds of thousands of hours that we save clients, but how are you using that? What are people doing with that time? And I find, I don't know, at least with me, when I have extra time or don't have enough time, there's always a list of, I need to do this project. I have this to-do list. I have these things I have to look into. And you just don't get there. So that's, I think, a good way to think about it, of what's next on your to-do list that you wouldn't have done today.
Oh, that makes total sense.
For those of us who still keep paper lists too.
Those paper notebooks that follow you around everywhere.
Oh, I love it.
I think one other thing that we've been hearing a lot from our lenders as we've had conversations is kind of this overall rise in different loan types that they haven't necessarily done as much before, particularly around new construction is I think something that we're seeing more and more lenders doing with the housing inventory issue. What do you see around that? Where do you think that's going?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. We've worked with a top 5 home builder for 5 years at least at this point. So a lot of familiarity with construction, something that we've seen quite a bit. And it's been interesting because a year ago, no one wanted to touch construction because of the price of goods are going up. But as home prices rise, it becomes more profitable to build a home. Also, as there's demand, but not supply of people don't want to move out of their current homes for whatever reason. How do you fill that gap? You build houses. Yeah. So it's interesting to see that happening. I'm curious to see kind of where that goes. And I think to your point about the purchase market, of the demand's there. Personally, I don't think interest rates have the same effect on purchase volume as people may think they have. Obviously, refinance is a completely financial interest rate motivated decision. But with purchases, I don't think so. My wife and I are starting to think about buying a home. And even if at a 5% mortgage doesn't really have me personally terribly nervous, because within 3 years, it's going to get refied. At some point, those interest rates are going down, and no one's holding onto a mortgage for 30 years, but it's going to change. So I'm not necessarily dissuaded, I would say, by that.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. I think, going back to your point earlier with the purchase market, I think, we talk a lot about random acts of marketing and how we're starting to see a very not proactive, but reactive response from lenders. Yeah. Lenders that are starting to get nervous and starting to do all this marketing now. What would you say to them as someone who's gone over a rebrand and this huge marketing effort? Your insight as a CEO on that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's tough to trace the shiny object chase, oh, purchases are going to be good, or HELOCs are important right now, or new construction is important right now. I think you have to realistically look at what type of business can you get, what's the most profitable, what ultimately is reasonable and realistic and something scalable, because we've gone down this trap at Lodestar plenty of times where just because you can do something and make a buck on it doesn't mean you should, right? So you look at the things you can make more bucks on. And I think the important thing of doing that is really looking at your costs, your revenue on items, and also what's realistic. There's when I was watching Shark Tank the other day, and there's like a joke within like pitching startups that people will say, oh, okay, we're going to get 1% of the Chinese market and be millionaires with this toothbrush product or whatever the heck it is. Right. So it's like, well, you haven't done your research if you're just thinking you can get 1% of China, because how are you marketing to these people? Who is your customer? What are you doing specific? Right. The big, 1% of China and then a big hockey stick growth graph is just not what this looks like at the end of the day. It's not terribly realistic. And I think you look at that when you say, let me break into, oh, how many purchases are there? How many HELOCs are there? How many new construction? No, you have to be on a much more local type tactical level with that, of what are you chasing after? And also what are your costs? Is the added cost of going after this worth it? And I think a lot of companies, when they look at their cost, don't take into account their own time.
Yeah. No, that's a very
so
true
that's
thing.
Another really, really important kind of element of that.
Yeah, it's hard to necessarily track your overall when you're talking about employees that are receiving a salary or not hourly. Yeah. It's sometimes really hard to track the true cost of a project, right? Along those lines. Mm-hmm. Now, as always, we like to wrap up with our signature question. I know I've asked you this before, but we're going to do it anyways. So right now, what is getting you out of bed in the morning and getting you excited for your day?
Besides a 6-month-old,
that's what's getting you out of bed.
I'm just excited to spend more time working on more projects, working on partnerships, thinking of things like, how do we get fees in the hands of more people, right? How do we continue our mission of being kind of fee experts at the end of the day? It's really, really interesting, because I think now partners, companies, they're looking at all elements of their business and looking at different ways to partner. We had, I think, put some content out about the integration announcements seem to have gone down, right? Is that because there are fewer integrations, or just people expect them so they're not that exciting anymore? I think that level of connectivity is something that's almost like baked into the industry. So people are getting a little more savvy about that, about ways they want to partner, ways they want to work, something like fees into what they're doing. So it's really fun to hear about that, to meet with more people, meet with our clients, meet with our potential clients or staff. So I think it's really fun and a lot of exciting things to do there. I sent my wife a picture of Tigger from Winnie the Pooh kind of jumping in, and that was kind of how I felt this morning going to the office. So it's been great, and definitely excited to carry that energy forward. And the one last thing I do want to say too, at the top of the call, you kind of asked about coming back from leave. I think for myself, it's really changed my perspective on what that leave means to both a mom and a dad, and any parent, of how valuable that time, that flexibility is to have. I'm in a very fortunate position where I could kind of carve that out, have a great team to support me, and, are able to kind of mold my job around that. A lot of people aren't. So I think as folks who are managers, especially now, you're in the great resignation, right? People are looking at their jobs, looking at making changes. The more flexibility, the more, just human decency that you can offer to people, the better. And I think, now, even as things are slow, looking at how to keep your key staff is really important. So as you're probably looking at your staff, figuring out if you have to make cuts, what you have to do, and figuring out who are those key folks, you always have to have that conversation of who's really important and how do we keep them there. And one of the things, I was listening to a podcast about the great resignation and what to do and how to, manage this moment. And one of the things they said is they have an exit interview, right? When someone leaves, and they say all of their issues and why they're leaving, right? Well, why do you have to wait until they left to have that conversation? Right. So what's called stay interviews of, are you going to stay? Not necessarily, or like, what could be better about this job? We work it into our twice a year reviews, but actually having reviews, having those conversations and trying to pinpoint those issues before they go
Or
out the
they
door.
have. Yeah, I think having regular check-ins with your staff is something I could not, like, is so valuable to me as a manager that I
Right.
could not imagine not having them, right? Because you get so much invaluable or such valuable feedback from those meetings of that week to week of like, are they having the same pain point every week, right? That they're coming to you and saying, this is really annoying. This is really annoying. This is really annoying. Okay, well, how can I fix it? And it then just becomes, nothing is a surprise then when you get to the review, and nothing should be a surprise when you get to review, right? And I think that's so important as well, is if you are springing something on someone in a review, you need to look at yourself and ask yourself, well,
Or
why
shouldn't be a surprise when someone leaves unless they win the lottery, right? Like that
right?
should not be something that just jumps up.
Yeah, you should kind of know as a leader how your staff is feeling and have a good vibe on that.
Yep. So I think it's a great moment for that. There was a sketch on SNL the other night about coming out of COVID. It was, is my brain okay? Right. And I think a lot of people are coming out of this 2-year period and their perspectives have changed a lot. Right. So seeing what that's looking like now as more things are opening up, more ability to move and make different decisions in your life, you know, checking in with all of your staff and saying, hey, is your brain okay?
Are you doing good?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, I think it's great. And we're very excited to have you back, Jim. I know personally for me, it's great. So, you know, that's wonderful. And of course, everyone can find us on LinkedIn is probably the best place to find us. We're trying to post consistently and honestly. And Jim also produces a weekly newsletter as well called Deeper Thoughts that goes out every Tuesday on the Lodestar LinkedIn account, if anyone is interested.
And we're not too far from our summer series starting too. So we'll take any sort of ridiculous topics for conversation.
Yes.
I don't know if this is technically Hot Girl Summer #2 or what, but whatever it is, we will talk about it.
Yeah, someone needs to tell us what we should call it because we're not in enough to know.
That's why we need interns. Yeah.
Yes. We just need some Gen Zs floating around to tell us what it's supposed to be this year.
Yeah.
But yes, we will have our summer session. That'll just be Jim and I. So you'll get to see the two of us together talking about anything and everything and probably what movies we're watching.
Definitely.
Yeah. So thank you, Jim, so much for joining us. And I'm so excited to have you back.
Yeah. Same here. Excited to be back. Thanks again for everything you do. And we'll talk to everyone again soon.